My name is Brenda Curran, your host for this year's Tennessee Williams Tribute Reading, a centerpiece of the annual Tennessee Williams and New Orleans Literary Festival. Each year, a great group of actors and authors read selections from Tennessee's work. This year, for the 35th anniversary, we'll hear the words of a Tennessee written about New Orleans, and as well as works created while he lived in the French Quarter. We'll be hearing excerpts from his plays, poetry, short stories, letters, and journal entries. Being a fan is a natural condition for me, but doing research on these performers has been a dizzying, falling in love experience because of who they are as individuals and their body of work. So thank you, Paul Willis, Executive Director of the festival and my dear friend, for inviting me for the 7th straight year in a row to participate in this magical event and to actually be here on location in the historic Beauregard Kai's house, right here in the French Quarter. And here we go. Alan Cumming. Eclectic, virtuoso, tour de force, Renaissance man, all of these words would describe Alan Cumming. To put it simply, Alan Cumming is a genius. I have been in his thrall since seeing him as the master of ceremonies in the hit revival of Cabaret at the Roundabout Theater. He won the Tony Award and every other major award given that year for Best Male Lead in a Musical. And most recently, I listened to him read the audiobook of his devastating, inspiring memoir, I Am Not My Father's Son. Notwithstanding the cruel circumstances of his childhood growing up in Scotland, Time magazine called him the 3rd most fun man in show business. I bet he would have loved New Orleans, as Williams did. Quote, the place I was made for. New Orleans would adore him. Here he is reading Candy, a drag queen, from And Tell Sad Stories About the Death of Queens.
Yes, I owned 3 pieces of property in the Quarter, this one and 2 others, all in good locations, rental property. The one on Chartres has 6 rental units, including the slave quarters, and the one on Dumaine, 4 units. Entire slave quarters occupied by one tenant, a real showplace. I'll show it to you right after Mass tomorrow. Mr. Fraser, the tenant's in Biloxi, spends every weekend there. Has a friend at the Air Base. And then, of course, I have my shop on St. Charles, just a block from Lee Circle. On this side of Lee Circle, a half-hour's walk away, but very good for my figure. Take a look at my lovely patio, Carl. I had a business partner till just lately, a very nice older man who used to be my sponsor. We had a beautiful relationship for 17 years. He brought me out in Atlanta that long ago. I've had a very protected life till lately. Here he is. This is him. He left his wife for me, sold out his business in Atlanta, and we moved here in the war years. When I was 18, and he set me up in this shop and made me his partner in it. Well, nothing lasts forever. You dream that it will, but it don't. I shut these doors so my tenants don't come flying down. Now, no, nothing goes on forever. I worshipped Sidney Congold. I never noticed that he got heavy, but Sidney had the aging man's weakness for youth. I understood. I didn't even resent it. Oh, I had a nervous collapse when he left, but I didn't reproach him for it. I put no financial obstacles in his way. I made no demands. I said to him, Sid, Whatever makes you happy is what I want for you, Daddy. If my tenants come down to the door, don't make a sound till they go. Those queens. Yes, queens. Women? Oh, no. I'd never enter women again in my life. They're not only very slow payers, they're messy and destructive. No, these tenants are a pair of boys from Alabama. Young queens, of course. I'd never considered renting to anyone else. Queens make wonderful tenants, take excellent care of the place, sometimes improve it for you. They are great home lovers and have creative ideas. They set the styles and create the taste for the country. Don't you know that? Just imagine this country without queens in it. It would be absolutely barbaric. Look at the homes of normal married couples. No originality. Modern mixed with period. Everything bunched around a big TV set in the parlor. Mediocrity is the passion among them. Conformity, convention. Now, I know the faults of queens. Nobody knows the faults of queens better than I do.
Jacob Storms is an actor and writer and known for his portrayal of the young Tennessee Williams in Tennessee Rising, The Dawn of Tennessee Williams, directed by none other than Alan Cumming for the stage. Jacob's going to bring his one-man show to New Orleans for the festival stage in 2022. There are several Tennessee Williams short stories that feature New Orleans as a location and almost as a character in the main action. Jacob is going to read an excerpt from the most famous of those stories, One Arm. Originally published in 1948, Williams later adapted the story into a screenplay in the 1960s, and in 2011, director Moises Kaufman adapted it for the stage. Here are the opening pages of the story.
In New Orleans, in the winter of '39, there were 3 male hustlers, usually to be found hanging out on a certain corner of Canal Street and one of those streets that dive narrowly into the ancient part of the city. 2 of them were just kids of about 17 and worth only passing attention, but the oldest of the 3 was an unforgettable youth. His name was Oliver Weinmiller, and he had been the light heavyweight champion boxer of the Pacific Fleet before he lost an arm. Now he looked like a broken statue of Apollo, and he had also the coolness and impassivity of a stone figure. While the 2 younger boys exhibited the anxious energy of sparrows, darting in and out of bars, flitting across streets and around corners in pursuit of some likely quarry, Oliver would remain in one spot and wait to be spoken to. He never spoke first, nor solicited with a look. He seemed to be staring above the heads of passerby, with an indifference which was not put on, or surly and vain, but had its root in a genuine lack of concern. He paid almost no attention to weather. When the cold rains swept in from the Gulf, the 2 younger boys stood hunched and shuddering in shabby coats that effaced them altogether. But Oliver remained in his skivvy shirt and his dungarees, which had faded nearly white from long wear and much washing, and held to his body as smooth as the clothes of sculpture. Conversations like this would occur on the corner. "Aren't you afraid of catching cold, young fellow?" "No, I don't catch cold." "Well, there's a first time for everything." "Sure is." "You ought to go in somewhere and get warmed up." "Where?" "I have an apartment." "Which way is it?" "A few blocks down in the quarter. We'll take a cab." "Let's walk, and you give me the cab fare." Oliver had been in his crippled condition for just 2 years. The injury had been suffered in the seaport of San Diego when he and a group of shipmates had collided with the wall of an underpass while driving a rented car at 75 miles an hour. 2 of the sailors in the car had been killed outright. A third had received a spinal injury that would keep him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Oliver got off lightest with just the loss of an arm. He was 18 then, and his experience had been limited. He came from the cotton fields of Arkansas, where he had known only hard work in the sun and such emotional adventures as farm boys have on Saturday nights and Sunday afternoons, a tentative knowledge of girls that suddenly exploded into a coarse and startling affair with a married woman whose husband he had hauled lumber for. She was the first to make him aware of the uncommon excitement he was able to stir. It was to break off this affair that he left home and entered the Navy at a base in Texas. During his period of training, he had taken up boxing, and while he was still a boot, he became an outstanding contender for the Navy championship. The life was good fun and no thinking. All that he had to do was deal with the flesh and its feelings. But then the arm had been lost, and with it he was abruptly cut off from his development as an athlete and a young man wholly adequate to the physical world he grew into. Oliver couldn't have put into words the psychic change which came with his mutilation. He knew that he had lost his right arm, but didn't consciously know that with it had gone the center of his being. But the self that doesn't form words nor even thoughts had come to a realization that whirled darkly up from its hidden laboratory and changed him altogether, in less time than it took new skin to cover the stump of the arm he had lost. He never said to himself, "I'm lost." But the speechless self knew it, and in submission to its unthinking control, the youth had begun, as soon as he left the hospital, to look about for destruction. He took to knocking about the country, going first to New York. It was there that Oliver learned the ropes of what became his calling. He fell in with another young vagrant who wised him up to his commodity value and how to cash in on it. Within a week, the one-armed youth was fully inured to the practices and the culture of the underworld that seethed around Times Square and the Broadway bars and the bench-lined walks of the park. And foreign as it was, the shock that it gave him was slight. The loss of the arm had abruptly dulled his senses. With it had gone the wholesome propriety that had made him leave home when the coarse older woman had introduced him to acts of unnatural ardor. Now he could feel no shame that green soap and water did not remove well enough to satisfy him. When summer had passed, he joined the southern migration. He lived in Miami a while. He struck it rich down there. He made the acquaintance of some wealthy sportsmen, and all that season he passed from one to another with money that piled up faster than he could spend it on clothes and amusement. Then one night he got drunk on a broker's yacht in the harbor of Palm Beach, and for no reason that was afterward sure to him, he struck the man's inclined head 8 times with a copper bookend, the final splitting the skull. He swam to shore, collected his things, and beat it out of the state. This ended the more affluent chapter of Oliver's existence. From that time on, he moved from protection and less conspicuous circles, losing himself in the swarm of his fugitive kind, wherever a town was large enough for such traffic to pass without too much attention. Then one evening during this winter in New Orleans, shortly after the Mardi Gras season, and when he was beginning to think of heading back north, Oliver was picked up by a plainclothesman and driven to jail. Not on an ordinary charge of lewd vagrancy, but for questioning in connection with the murder of the wealthy broker in the harbor at Palm Beach. They got a full confession from him in 15 minutes.
And now, reading for us is Amy Ryan. Oh my goodness. Delving into Amy Ryan's career knocked my socks off. The film director Tom McCarthy said of the New Jersey housewife she brought to life, quote, "She really has such a wide range, but she can conceal it all." On TV, she's known and beloved as Steve Carell's girlfriend in The Office, and before that she was Beatty Russell in The Wire. Her portrayal of Helene McGready won her an Oscar nomination. In 2004, Amy began her journey as Stella in A Streetcar Named Desire at the Kennedy Center alongside New Orleans' own Patricia Clarkson's acclaimed Blanche. Amy reprised her role as Stella on Broadway, and her performance earned her one of her 2 Tony nominations. Amy's going to read from one of my favorite Williams short stories, Angel in the Alcove, that takes place at 722 Toulouse Street. Amy's going to read from one of my favorite short stories, Angel in the Alcove. Here, Williams recounts a spiritual experience, a visitation from the person most loving, most loyal, most gentle in his life, his grandmother, Rose Dakin Ott, known as Grand.
The Angel in the Alcove. Suspicion is the occupational disease of landladies, and long association with them has left me with an obscure sense of guilt I will probably never be free of. The initial trauma in this category was inflicted by a landlady I had in the old French Quarter of New Orleans when I was barely 20. She was the archetype of suspicious landlady. She had a room of her own, but preferred to sleep on a rattling cot in the downstairs hall so that none of her tenants could enter or leave the establishment during the night without her grudging permission. When finally I left there, I fooled the old woman. I left by way of a balcony and a pair of sheets. I was miles out of town on the old Spanish Trail to the west before the woman found out I had gotten past her. The downstairs hall of this rooming house on Bourbon Street was totally lightless. You had to grope your way through it with cautious revulsion, trailing your fingers along the damp, cracked plaster until you arrived at the door or the foot of the stairs. You never reached either without the old woman's challenge. Her ghostly figure would spring bolt upright on the rattling iron cot. She would utter one syllable, "Who?" If she were not satisfied with the identification given or suspected that you were taking your luggage out in a stealthy departure or bringing somebody in for carnal enjoyment, a match would be struck on the floor and held toward you for several moments. In its weirdly flickering light, she would squint her eyes at you until her doubts were dismissed. Then she would flop back down in a huddle of sour blankets, and if you waited to listen, you would hear mutterings vicious and coarse as any that drunks in quarter barrooms ever gave voice to. She was a woman of paranoidal suspicion, and her suspicion of me was unbounded. Often she came in my room with the morning paper and read aloud some item concerning an act of crime in the quarter. After the reading, she would inspect me closely for any guilty change of countenance, and I would nearly always gratify her suspicion with a deep flush and inability to return her look. I am sure she had chalked up dozens of crimes against me and was only waiting for some more concrete betrayal to call the police, a captain of whom, she warned me, was her first cousin. In this old house, it was either deathly quiet, or else the high plaster walls were ringing like fire bells with angry voices, with quarrels over the use of the lavatory or accusations of theft or threats of eviction. I had no door to my room, which was the attic, only a ragged curtain that couldn't exclude the barrage of human wretchedness often exploding. The walls of my room were pink and green stippled plaster, and there was an alcove window. This alcove window shone faintly in the night. There was a low bench beneath it. Now and again, when the room was otherwise lightless, a misty gray figure would appear to be seated on this bench in the alcove. It was the tender and melancholy figure of an angel or some dun, elderly Madonna. The apparition occurred in the alcove most often on those winter nights in New Orleans, when slow rain is falling from a sky not clouded heavily enough to altogether separate the town from the moon. New Orleans and the moon have always seemed to me to have an understanding between them, an intimacy of sisters grown old together, no longer needing more than a speechless look to communicate their feelings to each other. This lunar atmosphere of the city draws me back whenever the waves of energy which removed me to more vital towns have spent themselves, and a time of recession is called for. Each time I have felt some rather profound psychic wound, a loss or a failure, I have returned to this city. At such periods, I would seem to belong there and no place else in the country. During this first period in New Orleans, none of the small encouragements in my life as a writer had yet come along, and I had already accepted the terms of anonymity and failure. I had already learned to make a religion of endurance and a secret of my desperation. The nights were comforting. When the naked light bulb had been turned off and everything visible gone except the misty alcove set deeply and narrowly into the wall above Bourbon, I would seem to slip into another state of being which had no trying associations with the world. For a while the alcove would remain empty, just a recess that light came faintly into, but after my thoughts had made some dreamy excursion or other and I turned again to look in that direction, the transparent figure would noiselessly have entered and seated herself on the bench below the window and begun that patient watching which put me to sleep. The hands of the figure were folded among the colorless draperies of her lap, and her eyes were fixed up on me with a gentle, unquestioning look, which I came to remember as having belonged to my grandmother during her sieges of illness, when I used to go to her room and sit by her bed and want to say something, or put my hand over hers but could not do either, knowing that if I did, I would burst into tears that would trouble her more than her illness. The appearance of this grave figure in the alcove never preceded the time of falling asleep by more than a few moments. When I saw her there, I thought comfortably, "Ah, now, I'm about to slip away. It will all be gone in a moment and won't come back until morning."
Thomas Keith has edited the Tennessee Williams titles for New Directions since 2002, including 4 volumes of unpublished and uncollected one-acts. He has served as dramaturg for Sundance Theater Lab, reader for Yale Drama Prize, and teaches theater at Pace University. And for the past 15 years, Thomas has worked with Paul on programming Williams content for the festival, including co-curating the annual tribute reading. This year, I'm excited that Thomas will be reading the prose-like poetry of Williams' Mornings on Bourbon Street.
Williams began drafting this poem during his first 6 weeks in the French Quarter in 1939. He completed it in 1943, and it was published in 1944. The title is Mornings on Bourbon Street. He knew he would say it, but could he believe it again? He thought of the innocent mornings on Bourbon Street, of the sunny courtyard and the iron lion's head on the door. He thought of the quality light could not be expected to have again after rain. The pigeons and drunkards coming together from under the same stone arches to move again in the sun's faint mumble of benediction with faint surprise. He thought of the tall iron horseman before the cabildo, tipping his hat so gallantly toward old wharves, the mist of the river beginning to climb about him. He thought of the rotten sweet odor the old quarter had, so much like a warning of what he would have to learn. He thought of belief and of the gradual loss of belief and the piecing together of something like it again. But oh, how his blood had almost turned in color when once, in response to a sudden call from a window, he stopped on a curbstone and first thought, love, love, love. He knew he would say it, but could he believe it again? He thought of Irene, whose body was offered at night behind the cathedral, whose outspoken pictures were hung outdoors in the public square as brutal as knuckles smashed into grinning faces. He thought of the merchant sailor who wrote of the sea haltingly, with a huge power locked in a halting tongue, lost in a tanker off the Florida coast the locked and virginal power burned in oil. He thought of the opulent antique dealers on Royal, whose tables of rosewood gleamed as blood under lamps. He thought of his friends. He thought of his lost companions, of all he had touched, and all those whose touch he had known. He wept for remembrance. But when he had finished weeping, he washed his face. He smiled at his face in the mirror, preparing to say to you, whom he had expected, love, love, love. But could he believe it again?
Williams' first visit to New Orleans in late December 1938 continued through all of January and then until February 18, 1939, when he and a friend headed off to California. Just a mere 7 weeks in total, it literally changed the course of his life. Liberated from his unhappy family in St. Louis, liberated as an artist, and liberated sexually. For the rest of his life, those first months in New Orleans were one of the major sparks of his creativity. Playwright and actor Rodney Hicks will now read excerpts from Williams' letters home to his mother, Edwina, in St. Louis, while his friend and incoming festival board president, Lawrence Henry Gobble, will read in counterpoint Williams' journal entries from the same time in New Orleans.
To Edwina Dakin Williams, 431 Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, December 29th, 1938. Dear Mother, this is the most fascinating place I've ever been. Arrived late last night and spent this morning finding a room, very scarce on account of Sugar Bowl game. I am situated for a week at 431 Royal Street. Letter soon. Tom.
Friday, 30th December, 1938. Judas Priest. It's no use denying the fact that I'm very blue and lonesome. I met nobody but the Heldners and seen them only once. Being completely alone for 48 hours, even in the most enchanting of cities, has gotten on my nerves. Something will have to happen to relieve my depression tomorrow, or perhaps all will be lost. Nothing constructive so far except a brief meeting with Ashton, director of the WPA Theater, who told me to see a young lady about submitting my scripts. I think I'll do that tomorrow. I must do something. Somebody's just moved into the room next door. Even a stranger across the wall is comforting me in this state. Sunday, 1 January, 1939. New Year's Day, 1939. What a night. I was introduced to the bohemian life of the quarter with a bang. All very interesting. Some utterly appalling. This morning, I shall call for my hat, which was left at one of the parties.
431 Royal Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, Monday, January 2nd, 1939. Dear Mother, the city has been wild with the football and sport carnival crowd. The big game was today, so they will be gone tomorrow. I rented a room here in a cheap but clean hotel for $4 a week. He would give me a month for $12, but I think I will find something better for that price soon as the crowd is gone. I'm crazy about the city. I walk continually. There is so much to see. The weather is balmy, today like early summer. I have no heat in my room. None is needed. The quarter is really quainter than anything I've seen abroad. In many homes, the original atmosphere is completely preserved. Today, being a holiday, I visited Audubon Park, which is lovelier than I could describe. Blooming like summer with palm trees and live oaks garlanded with Spanish moss. Beautifully laid out. Also visited the Batture dwellers, squatters along the river, and for contrast, the fine residential district in the two universities, Loyola and Tulane. The latter appears to be a splendid school. It was closed today, so I'm going to make another visit. The quarter is alive with antique and curio shops where some really artistic stuff is on sale, relics of Creole homes that have gone to the block. I was invited to dinner Sunday by some people who own a large antique store. Their home is a regular treasure chest of precious objects. Food is amazingly cheap. I get breakfast at the French market for a dime. Lunch and dinner amount to about 50 cents at a good cafeteria near Canal Street. And the cooking is the best I've encountered away from home. Raw oysters, 20 cents a dozen, shrimp, crab, lobster, and all kinds of fish. I have a passion for seafood, which makes their abundance a great joy. The courtyards are full of palms, vines, and flowering poinsettia, many with fountains and wells, and all with grill work, balconies, and little winding stairs. It is heaven for painters, and you see them working everywhere. Mr. and Mrs. Heldner, Alice Lipman's friends, say that if I get desperate, I can earn bread as a model, but I trust something better will turn up. There's a writer's project here, and many of the writers I have met are on it. Perhaps there is room for more. Lyle Saxton is the head of it. The fine weather and much walking have cured my cold, and I'm feeling splendidly. We'll be here till Thursday, and then we'll send my new address. With love, Tom. P.S. My present money is holding out pretty good. I will write before it is exhausted and give you a more permanent mailing address. Oh, P.S. Mailed my plays from Memphis in plenty of time.
Saturday, 14 January, 1939. Saturday, January 14th. I've been here for over 2 weeks now. A new epic in my career is underway. I'm about to resume my job as a waiter, also cashier, working for my landlady, the widow, who is opening a restaurant. How it will turn out, God knows. A rather exciting prospect. Life here has been rather even and pleasant. Nothing really dramatic since New Year's Eve. I've made a nice friend in Frank Bunce, who gets about $500 a month writing for the Saturday Evening Post. Our viewpoints in art and life are so dramatically divergent that it is amazing that we should be friends. It struck me today as an idea for a novel or play, Strange Companions, in which a boy of my sort is contrasted to a fellow like Bunce, their reactions to each other, influence, etc. A psychological thing. I swim every day at the Y, eat at cafeterias, go to movies, write rather badly, especially my verse, which I made the error of sending off. Things are impending in my life. Of that I am sure. And so I'm reasonable, content for the nonce, willing to wait and see what's up. In the meantime, au revoir. P.S. When I read this book, I'm appalled at myself. What a fool I am. Quelle sottise, comme je suis bête, parbleu. It is valuable as a record of one man's incredible idiocy. Who is reputed to be at least partially sane? Or is he? Probably not. Once in a while, rarely, I show a glimmer of intelligence. Most of the time, an abominable dullness. What is there in me that remains above and beyond all this? Level-eyed, serious, tender, brave, immaculately clean? Yes, there is something in me like that, and something that remains apart and keeps the record, engraves the reckoning. When that dies, then I will be finally and completely dead. Or is that an illusion? Am I all animal, all willful, blind, stupid beast? Is there another part that is not an accomplice in this mad pilgrimage of the flesh? Oh, well, you're getting rhetorical, old boy. Good night. Monday, 16 January, 1939. Monday, January 16th, 39. Tomorrow, the quarter eat shop will be open for trade. Let us hope there is some. Today, a funny little fellow named Verbeck came running into the house in search of a lost black cat. Turns out to be a poet who writes about dragons and chrysanthemums. Very copious, but very nice. Yesterday I went to the Ormies, had a dull evening. There again, this AM. S took me to breakfast, and D cashed my check. And they promised to attend our opening, but I think they are a pretty foul lot, and I will probably be more reserved with them in the future. Clever, good-humored people, but altogether lacking of anything of a lyrical nature, which I think of as an indispensable to decent human soul. World apparently on the point of explosion. War, war, war. And I write fanciful, introspective little stories and precious verse. Tom, Tom, what are we going to do with you? Throw you out on the front sidewalk where they put their garbage in the Vieux Carré. I deserve nothing better. Well, nothing much better. Good night.
722 Toulouse Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, January 18th, 1939. Dear Mother, I just have time for a few lines. I'm enclosing one of our printed cards, which I composed and have been distributing around town. The slogan is my own invention and seems to be effective. We opened yesterday. Business is extremely slow as the place has had no publicity except the cards. We haven't even gotten the sign up yet. However, at each meal, we have one more than before. And the meals are delicious. So if we can hold out a week or two, I think it will go over fine. I serve as waiter, cashier, publicity manager, host, in fact, every possible capacity, including sometimes dishwasher. When not busy in the dining room, I stand on the sidewalk and try to drag people upstairs. It is really a great deal of fun. Besides myself, there are 3 widows running the place. Mrs. Anderson, who owns it, is a perfect termagant, but the cooking is the best I've ever tasted. The cook is an old lady who ran a restaurant in Florida during the Depression. We all conspire to keep Mrs. Anderson out of the way as her sharp tongue kills the trade. I usually find time to do some writing in between meals, and of course my evenings are free. My play is still in Florida, being considered by the regional directors of the WPA. I won't hear back from it for another week, they say. One of my best friends here is on the staff of the Saturday Evening Post, gets $500 per story and sells 1 or 2 every month. But he says he hates writing because he is forced to satisfy popular demands. Since he has a car and many attractive girlfriends, he has proved a very valuable friend to me. If I can get off Thursday, we are going to drive over to Gulfport, Mississippi to visit some girls he knows there. My waiter's uniform is wash pants, dark coat, and bow tie. Sometime when you're not busy, I would like to have you send all my wash pants with the checked spring suit, but don't go to any trouble about it. I was delighted to get the shoes in the other package. With much love, Tom. P.S. Business is picking up. We served 10 suppers.
Saturday, midnight, January 28, 1939. Well, the Quarter Eat shop had a very brief existence, exactly 1 week. It is now past history. Little man, what now? I wish I knew. My life seems to be a pretty constant state of wishing I knew. Well, I found out before and shall again. I've applied for work on the Fed Writers Project. Joe Turner and I both. Joe is a nice guy I met at the Eat Shop. I think I may count on him on one of those 10 fingers I reserve for okay people. Him and Frank Bunks. Also met a little girl, Lillian Romano, who is sweet and appealing, but no mental giant. I write badly or not at all. Started a marvelously promising new play last week, but can't seem to get going on it. Oh, Joel. Is it down to write and nothing happens? Washed up? No. I need a rest from my creative labors. I'm stale, or I need a new stimulus. The Eat Shop was ideal as it gave me something else to do. Saved my eyes and my brain and my money. But like all lovely things, it proved too fugitive. Oh well. Visited Burbeck's studio tonight. Rather dismal. Talented and yet completely uninteresting. I wonder about next week. running short of funds, and I don't know what to do with my tiresome old self these days. Hair falling out alarmingly too. Many complaints tonight. What's right with me? My health. I've been feeling damn good, but that doesn't seem to offer much consolation. What good's the old carcass when it's got nothing inside but a 25-watt bulb and seems all burnt out? Shit, don't give me that stuff. Good night, all.
722 Toulouse Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, early February 1939. Dear Mother, it is just as well Grand and Grandfather decided to delay their visit, as we've had a very hectic time at 722 Rue Toulouse. As I've probably mentioned, the landlady has had a hard time adjusting herself to the bohemian spirit of the Vieux Carré. Things came to a climax this past week when a Jewish society photographer in the first floor studio gave a party, and Mrs. Anderson expressed her indignation at their revelry by pouring a bucket of water through her kitchen floor, which is directly over the studio, and caused a near riot among the guests. They called the patrol wagon, and Mrs. Anderson was driven to the 3rd precinct on charges of malicious mischief in disturbing the peace. The following night, we went to court. I was compelled to testify as one of the witnesses. Mrs. Anderson said she did not pour the water, but I, being under oath, could not perjure myself. The best I could do was say I thought it was highly improbable that any lady would do such a thing. The judge fined her $15. The process of certification for the Writers Project will be complete the 15th of this month, and I expect Mr. Saxon will put me on at once, as he seems very much concerned and sympathetic about my precarious situation. He gave me a list of trade journals yesterday that I might get temporary writing jobs from. I'm making a round of their offices. One of the radio stations is doing a weekly ghost story, and they're going to produce my spook radio drama, which I luckily got back from KSOK. They don't mention payment, but of course it may lead to something. The radio stations here are in pretty bad shape. In fact, everything is, except the business which caters directly to the tourists. Mrs. Anderson's unpopularity had wrecked the eat shop. I don't think she can ever reopen it. But Mrs. Anderson plans to sell the place for $350. Lease on the house and outright sale of the complete furnishings, many of which are valuable antiques. If you come down here, you might be interested. I'm completely out of funds now, so could use a few dollars if you're not in the same predicament. Hope you're all well and Dakin successful in his scholastic and social enterprises. With much love, Tom.
Part of the original Motley Crue, the Dreamland Players, cast in underground Shockmaster John Waters' cult fame films, thank goodness Mink Stole would remain a thoroughly offbeat, outrageous presence in counterculture films and alternative theater for 5 decades. Mink tours with her band, telling stories from her career and singing songs from doo-wop to Christmas carols. I've seen one of those shows and I had a ball. Recently, she received critical acclaim for her portrayal of Trinket Dugan, a Texas oil heiress and cancer survivor living in exile in the French Quarter, in Williams' classic of Dark Camp, The Mutilated. I had the opportunity to see Mink play this role. The depth and stillness of her trinket was the heart of the play.
It's going to take me a little while to recover from that shock. I'm still shivering from it. Yes, I felt close to panic, but now I'll get hold of myself. Why do I care so much? There's nothing shameful, nothing criminal in an affliction, a mutilation. I am not Agnes Jones. I am Trinket Duggan, and I have no intention of giving up, not a bit in the world. I wouldn't dare to or care to. Tonight, I will drive out Agnes Jones. I'll do it right now. How? I will walk around this bench, and when I have walked around it, Agnes Jones will be out of me and never get back in. Out, Agnes Jones. Out, Agnes Jones. Out, Agnes Jones. There now. It's such a clear, frosty night. I can see my breath in the air. And yes, I'm calming down now. I knew I would, and I am. In the afternoons, old people with nothing else to do come here and stay until the sun is fading away. When they leave here, I come here. I'm the night bench sitter of Jackson Square. The gates are closed at midnight. It's nearly midnight. My hands are still shaky. It's time for me to go to the Cafe Bohème and have my absinthe frappe at the corner table with an empty chair across from me, over-tipping, as though it's necessary to apologize for sitting alone at a table meant for two. Two. In life, there has to be two. The old winter voice of Agnes Jones is still in me. I said, out, Agnes Jones. Out, 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 and stay out. Once more around the bench. But of course, I do have to prepare myself for the possibility that Celeste will be in the Cafe Bohème tonight. And when I come in, is likely to make a vicious remark. Oh, I'd sink through the floor. I'd never be able to enter the place again. Out, Agnes Jones. Such a clear, frosty night. Andrew Jackson is all wet, shiny green, like he just rode up out of the sea. Oh, with so much beauty around me. Yes, still, even now, why should I have room in me for the ugly, cowardly voice of Agnes Jones? Too much solitude can be corrected. Yes, it must be corrected. I will correct solitude by what? Why not enter the Cafe Bohème tonight like a gladiator shouting, here I am, the mutilated Trinket Duggan, alias Agnes Jones. No, impossible. Not necessary. She can't prove the mutilation unless I expose it to someone. Oh, but not daring to expose the mutilation has made me go without love for 3 years now. And it's the lack of what I need most that makes me speak to myself with the bitter old winter cold voice of Agnes Jones. Love, a hand on my breast. No, no more negative thoughts. Tonight, I will give myself the Christmas gift of a lover. I will find him tonight, and he will be beautiful, perfect. Perhaps he'll be kind even. So kind that I can tell him about my mutilation. There's something I feel I ought to tell you before we, I couldn't get the words out, but I will think of something if I find him tonight. If that miracle happens tonight at the Cafe Bohème.
Anne Magnuson is yet another force, full of talent and invention as a writer, performance artist, nightclub entertainer, and actor with an impressive list of stage and screen credits. She's also the creator of magical, moving, and self-produced videos, such as Barely Coping, made during the pandemic using the yarn dolls her grandmother made for her as a child in Charleston, West Virginia. The yarn dolls, Dust Bunny, Arzetta, and the One-Eyed Gal, confront their fears about the coronavirus. For our tribute, Anne connects with fellow artist Adam Dugas, who plays the Doctor, as she brings us Violet Venable from the one-act play Suddenly Last Summer, a play set within the grounds of Mrs. Venable's mansion in the Garden District in New Orleans. Williams said he thought the play perhaps the most poetic he had written.
But here's my son's work, Doctor. Here is his life going on.
Poem of Summer.
Poem of Summer. And the date of the summer. There are 25 of them. He wrote one poem a year, which he printed himself on an 18th century hand press at his atelier at the French Quarter, so no one but he could see it.
He wrote one poem a year?
One for each summer that we traveled together. The other 9 months of the year were really only a preparation.
9 months.
The length of a pregnancy, yes.
Poem was hard to deliver?
Yes, even with me. Without me, impossible, Doctor. He wrote no poem last summer.
He died last summer.
Without me, he died last summer. That was his last summer's poem. One long summer ago. Now, why am I thinking of this? My son Sebastian said, Mother, listen to this. And he read me Herman Melville's description of the Encantadas, the Galapagos Islands. Quote, take 25 heaps of cinders dumped here and there in an outside city lot. Imagine some of them magnified into mountains and the vacant lot the sea. And you'll have a fit idea of the general aspect of the Encantadas, the Enchanted Isles. Extinct volcanoes, looking much as the world at large might look after a last conflagration, end quote. He read me that description and he said we had to go there. And so we did go there that summer on a chartered boat, a 4-masted schooner, as close as possible to the sort of boat that Melville must have sailed on. We saw the Encantadas, but on the Encantadas, we saw something else, something Melville hadn't written about. We saw the great sea turtles crawl up out of the sea for their annual egg lay. Once a year, the female of the sea turtle crawls up out of the equatorial sea onto the blazing sand beach of a volcanic island to dig a pit in the sand and deposit her eggs there. It's a long and dreadful thing, the depositing of the eggs in the sand pits. And when it's finished, the exhausted female turtle crawls back to the sea half dead. She never sees her offspring, but we did. Sebastian knew exactly when the sea turtle eggs would be hatched out, and we returned in time for it.
You went back to the...
Terrible Encantadas, those heaps of extinct volcanoes, in time to witness the hatching of the sea turtles and their desperate flight to the sea. Oh, the narrow beach, the color of caviar, was all in motion. But the sky was in motion too.
The sky was in motion?
Full of flesh-eating birds. And the noise of the birds, the horrible savage cries of the
carnivorous birds.
Over the narrow black sand beach of the Encantadas as the just hatched sea turtles scrambled out of the sand pits and their race to the sea.
Race to the sea?
To escape the flesh-eating birds that made the sky almost as black as the beach. And the sand all alive as the hatched sea turtles made their dash to the sea while the birds hovered and swooped to attack. They were diving down on the hatched sea turtles, turning them over to expose their soft undersides, tearing the undersides open and rending and eating their flesh. Oh, Sebastian guessed that possibly only 1/100% of their number would escape to the sea.
What was it about the spectacle of the beach that fascinated your son?
My son was looking let's just say he was interested in sea turtles.
You started to say that your son was looking for something.
All right. I started to say that my son was looking for God. And I stopped myself because I was afraid that if I said he was looking for God, you'd say to yourself, oh, a pretentious young
crackpot, which Sebastian was not. All poets look for God. All good poets do. And they have to look harder for him than priests do, since they don't have the help of such famous guidebooks and well-organized expeditions as priests have with their scriptures and churches. All right, now I've said it. My son was looking for God. I mean, for a clear image of him. He spent that whole blazing equatorial day in the crow's nest of the schooner, watching that thing on the beach of the Encantadas till it was too dark to see it. And when he came back down the rigging, he said, well, now I've seen him. And he meant God.
I see.
Another star of stage and screen with formidable range and versatility is Blair Underwood. From the brash attorney Jonathan Rollins Blair played on LA Law when he was 21 years old, to the divorce attorney who finds himself defending one of the exonerated five in When They See Us, to the charming CIA officer in Quantico, the professor with the hashtag #MeToo issues in the Netflix comedy Dear White People, Blair demonstrates what he said once in an interview, quote, I like getting in the middle of relevant stories. A true multi-hyphenate, Blair is enjoying success as an actor, director, and producer. He brings to all his work a magnetic presence and a complex character to contend with, as he did when in 2012 he made his acclaimed Broadway debut in the iconic role of Stanley in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire. I know, because I saw his unforgettable portrayal. For the tribute tonight, he generously revisits for us his Stanley.
Lie number one. All this squeamishness she puts on. You should just know the line she been feeding to Mitch. He thought she ain't never been more than kissed by a fella. But Sister Blanche, she is no lily. Our supply man down at the plant has been going through Laurel for years, and he knows all about her. And everybody else in the town of Laurel knows all about her. She's as famous in Laurel as if she was the president of the United States, only she is not respected by any party. Now, this supply man stops at a hotel called the Flamingo. She stayed there too. This is after the home place had slipped through her lily white fingers. She moved to the Flamingo, a second-class hotel which has the advantage of not interfering in the private social life of the personalities there. The Flamingo used to all kinds of goings on, but even the management at the Flamingo was impressed by Dame Blanche. In fact, they were so impressed by Dame Blanche that they requested her to turn her room key in for permanently. This happened a couple of weeks before she showed up here. Yeah, sure. I can see how you'd be upset by this. She pulled the wool over your eyes as much as Mitch's. Honey, I told you, I thoroughly checked on these stories. Now, wait till I finish. Now, the trouble with Dame Blanche was that she couldn't put on her act anymore, Laurel. See, they got wised up to her after 2 or 3 dates with her, and then they quit. And she goes on to another. Same old line, same old act, same old hooey. But the town was too small for this to go on forever. And as time went by, she became a town character, regarded as not just different, but downright local. Nuts. And for the last 2 or 3 years, she's been washed up like poison. That's why she's here this summer, visiting royalty, putting on this act because she's practically told by the mayor to get out of town. Yes. Did you know that there's an army camp near Laurel? And your sister's was one of the places called Out of Bounds. Well, so much for her being such a refined and particular type of girl. Which brings us to lie number 2. She didn't resign temporarily from the high school because of her nerves. No, sorry, Bob, she didn't. They locked her out of that high school before the spring term ended. And I hate to tell you the reason the step was taken. A 17-year-old boy she'd gotten mixed up with. And when the boy's dad learned about it and got in touch with the high school superintendent, I'd like to have been in the office when Dame Blanche was called on the carpet. I'd like to have seen her trying to squirm out of that one. But they had her on the hook good and proper that time. And she knew the jig was all up. They told her she better move on to some fresh territory. Yep. It was practically a town ordinance passed against her. Hey everybody, it's Blair Underwood, and I just wanted to say happy 35th anniversary to the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival. I know we've been talking and communicating back and forth the last couple of years, and I have not had a chance to come down and actually be there in person. And here we are in the era of COVID in 2021, and I'm not able to be there again. But I did want to be able to say hello and to wish you happy 35th anniversary. And it was fun to say these words again, written by the brilliant Tennessee Williams. We did A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway in 2012. So this would be 9 years ago this year, 2021, which is hard to imagine, but it was an honor, such an honor to play Stanley in A Streetcar Named Desire and to do it on Broadway. The play was directed by Emily Mann, the wonderful Emily Mann, and then Blanche was played by Nicole Ari Parker, and Stella played by Daphne Rubin Vega, and Mitch played by Wood Harris, and a phenomenal, just a really terrific ensemble cast. But definitely one of the highlights of my career, and grateful to do it, and just really relished speaking those words of Tennessee Williams every night. I couldn't wait to hit the stage. So happy 35th anniversary. Have a great time, and hopefully we'll do it in person one of these days. Take care.
I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. Tennessee Williams was born on March 26th, 1911. So today we celebrate his birthday with our tribute. Happy birthday, Tennessee, and happy 35th anniversary to his namesake festival in New Orleans. I plan to make my voyage back here to the French Quarter in 2022. I hope you'll join me.